Let's talk more about the impact that tariffs are having across the continent of Africa. And for that, we're joined by Gyude Moore. He's a non-resident fellow at the Center for Global Development. Gyude, welcome to the program. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Important issue. The African continent runs the very real risk of really suffering from Trump's tariffs. And the African Growth and Opportunity Act was designed to boost industrialization, reduce poverty throughout Africa. This certainly seems like a massive step backward.
It does. It does. Thanks again for having me. I think more importantly, the countries that sort of leaned most into it, that were successful in integrating themselves in the global economy, especially the connection to the United States, are the countries that are most impacted by this. You heard your reporter talk there about Mauritius, Madagascar, Lesotho, South Africa, Kenya. Those countries are going to be significantly impacted by this. And because most African countries tend to depend on one or two few commodities exports, the loss of this market is going to be so disproportionate, especially to the countries that have come to depend on it.
Yeah, let's talk specifically about that, because Lesotho, as you mentioned, is really a great example of a country that has been very hard hit. This is a country of 2.3 million people, for those who don't know, and it is going to be hit with a 50% tariff on textiles and apparel, and that's basically what they do. So what can the government do? Because right now these businesses are turning to their government saying, we need help.
Well, like every other government around the world, I guess the good thing about this is that none of this is intentional toward Africa. It's all incidental. It was all global, but the effect is much greater in a place like Lesotho, where, to your example, exported around 230 million to the United States, imported about 3 million from the United States. It's simply a reflection of how poor the country is and that it can't afford most of the things that are produced here in the United States. So that's why it looks like that. I think, like most other governments, the Lesotho government is going to send a delegation to Washington and attempt to get a deal for themselves. But because, according to President Trump, 75 other countries are trying to get deals, one seems to, it looks as if the smallest African countries may not get the face time that they need to be able to adjust. One hopes, though, with the suspension, the 90-day suspension, and it might come down to the 10%, but even at 10%, it sort of goes against what AGOA was established for, and it imposes significant constraints and costs on Lesotho.
Yeah, and to pick up on what you're saying, this is a graphic example, Lesotho, why one size doesn't fit all when it comes to tariffs. You talked about those huge numbers going out, 247 million, and just a bit coming back, and again, because it's such a small nation. What impact could these tariffs have on a country like Lesotho's economy and the livelihoods? I mean, these are people out there with families, these textile workers, but it's not alone. Kind of talk about, I think you really hit the nail on the head. They may not get the face time that they need. And do you think the Trump administration in the past has been fair to many of these nations within the continent of Africa?
No, obviously not. The whole point of AGOA was to enable industrialization in Africa, and the normal path of industrialization for most countries that have done it has been through the textile path, and then slowly to move up in the complexity of that. So that's where Lesotho is. But more importantly, all of the reforms that a government needs to have access to the U.S. market, they did. All of the infrastructure that needs to be in place for textiles to prosper, they did. And it seems as if after they've done everything, they've been punished for doing that. And that's very difficult for them. One hopes, though, and that's why I think if there are 50 countries, 54 countries in Africa, and all 54 countries in Africa are attempting to negotiate separate deals with the Trump administration, it's going to be difficult. And that's why I think AGOA plays such a big role. However, because AGOA was in place and we still get tariffs, it sort of undercuts AGOA. But AGOA doesn't officially lapse until September. So there is a possibility here of African governments negotiating as a unit and using AGOA as a vehicle to talk to the Trump administration.
Yeah, once again, AGOA is the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And do you think that this is going to signal a dramatic shift in U.S.-Africa trade relations if something can't be worked out? And if that's the case, what's the future look like?
Oh, without question. You heard the South African, you heard the Ugandans. First, I think it's going to spur a look for other markets. It's going to spur a look for developing new trade relations. And because USAID was such a big part of the American presence on the continent, the loss of USAID left one major mechanism for U.S. engagement with Africa, and that's AGOA. If AGOA lapses, it means American presence on the continent has basically reduced to nothing. Automatically, it leaves China as the largest single actor, external actor on the continent. And so I think China is already the continent's largest trading partner. From the Biden administration, even the Obama administration, there was an attempt to establish sort of a beachfront for the United States on the continent, but this looks as if that's turning away, and it leaves China as sort of the winner here without actually doing anything, simply by remaining engaged on the continent.
Yeah, and once again, USAID was a very powerful organization that did so much for so many nations, and within a day, basically the administration here stripped the entity and ripped the name off the wall, so it's basically gone here in Washington, D.C. Now, the African continent has found a willing and reliable trade partner in China, especially with the Belt and Road. So do you think this is going to further open the door and see China further strengthening its economic ties?
Without question. The last FOCAC, the one before last September, so that's the one from 2021, at that FOCAC, China pledged to buy import $300 billion worth of products from Africa. And that meant one of the ways that they did that was the establishment of grain lanes that made it easier and less onerous for African governments, African economies to export agricultural products to China. And we've seen that go up significantly. Today, China is the continent's largest trade partner at $282 billion, and followed by India, UAE. EU 27 combined is still the largest, but as a single entity, China is. And so I think we're going to see sort of a deepening and strengthening of that relationship by default, not because African governments do not want to remain engaged with the United States, but because the United States, with this retrenchment. My hope, though, I remain really hopeful for this, for countries like Mauritius, Lesotho, that the access to the American market will remain, and that we find a way to renew the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act before September of this year.
Well said. Gyude Moore, thank you so much for your insight. Can't thank you enough.
Thank you.